and welcome to tonight's webinar for our horse owners. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Before we get going, before I introduce our fabulous speaker for tonight, I just want to give you a little bit of housekeeping. We are here to answer questions, and even if you're watching this on demand, we probably won't be able to answer your questions all on demand, but I will keep an eye on the questions coming through just because this is such a really interesting topic. And I'm sure you will have some great questions at some point and throughout the seasons over the year that you might be watching this webinar on demand. But the people here live tonight, please feel free to ask your questions. There is a question section. If you're watching on a laptop or a desktop, you should be able to see your question section. And you can type those questions and we'll be able to see them here in the back end of the webinar. If you are on a phone or a tablet, you might just need to pop out of the video screen, ask a question, and then come back into the video, and you'll still be able to watch it seamlessly. Hopefully, if there's any trouble with your signal, we can also see you popping information through there, and we can support you on this grid as well. We are here to help you. We really hope you enjoy this webinar tonight. It's all-season care for horses, managing weight and preventing laminitis. We have been raising money for the World Horse Welfare. They are a charity. And so for this webinar tonight, we have been asking for a £5 donation. Thank you so much for everybody who has donated tonight. That money has gone directly to the World Horse Welfare, and hopefully it will benefit lots of horses. I'm sure Sarah might touch on a few points on the World Horse Welfare later on. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Sara Hemmingfield. She has been at the World Horse Welfare for the last 3 years. She first joined the charity 9 years ago, and she has got a wealth of experience to share with you tonight. She is also a BHSAI, and a BHS International Teaching Certificate. For UK people watching tonight, that's pretty high ranking. She knows what she's talking about. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot from Sara tonight. So Sara, over to you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. So I wanted to talk to you today about managing your horse or pony's weight throughout the year. In particular, what are the dangers of your horse carrying excessive weight and how this relates to an increased risk of laminitis. I'm not a vet or a nutritionist, and both of these topics are a huge one. So my intention is for this to be practical advice and share with you some of the things that I come across as a field officer. Hopefully this will help you establish the current condition of your horse or pony and what, if anything, you might need to change. Next slide, please, Lizzie. So you'll all be aware that laminitis is an extremely painful condition of the foot. There are risk factors and certain breeds that are predisposed to laminitis, which we'll come on to shortly. But the really important thing to remember is that it can affect any horse or pony at any time of the year. Research has shown that 1 in 10 horses and ponies in Great Britain may develop an episode of laminitis every year. So it's best to maintain preventative management throughout the year. It is a condition that can come on really quickly, and also the initial signs can be very subtle. But it's also an incredibly painful condition and sometimes life-ending. Sadly, I do come across owners who actually they don't take it seriously enough. So as far as the pain levels are concerned, you really have to think of laminitis as being as painful and as serious as a fractured leg or colic. I once heard laminitis being likened to a heart attack in humans, which I think actually is a really good way of thinking of it. Just like a heart attack is a disruption of blood supply to the heart, laminitis is a disruption of the blood supply to the feet. So it's just as painful and just as serious. Although obviously, as we know, it affects the horse or pony's feet, think of laminitis as a condition that affects the whole horse, because that will really help you think about considerations for managing it and preventing it. Don't wait for it to become a problem and then think you'll deal with it. So prevention really is better than the cure. Next slide. So as I've just mentioned, laminitis can affect any horse or pony at any time of the year. And these are the factors, some of the factors anyway, that can increase the risk. Native ponies and good doers, as we all know, are more at risk because they're genetically predisposed to laminitis and to weight gain as well. But that doesn't mean that other breeds and types of horse and pony aren't at risk of laminitis. It is worth me mentioning here that laminitis can be a secondary effect of a horse suffering with another medical issue. So although that form of laminitis would be managed in the same way, tonight we're just going to be focusing on weight gain and weight management. Even if you have, if you have a horse or pony that is overweight, even if they're not as overweight as the pony in this photo, then they're at risk. So the weight gain affects insulin function, which increases the risk of laminitis, and overweight horses and ponies that have laminitis can actually take longer to recover. So, you know, we really do need to take it seriously. Just as a little bit of a side note here, I thought you'd be interested to know that the pony in this photo was one that I visited as a welfare concern. So several members of the public reported him to us on our welfare line because they were concerned about his lack of food. But absolutely not one of those callers had picked up on how much excess weight he was carrying and how much grazing he had access to. Very fortunately, when I visited him, he didn't have laminitis, but because of his body type and his breed, he was certainly at high risk of getting laminitis. Next slide. So if you think your horse and pony has laminitis, the quicker that you act, the more favourable the outcome will be. It's quite easy to see here in this photo that this pony is showing a typical laminitic stance and he's in trouble, but often the signs are very subtle. The studies have shown that a lot of owners didn't suspect that their horse or pony had laminitis until it was diagnosed by a vet. They suspected it was arthritis or colic or a hoof abscess. A few months ago, I got called out to a pony, again, another one that was reported to our welfare line, and the reporter was concerned about the pony because the pony was showing signs of colic, one of which was that he was lying down a lot, but when I got there, he'd actually got laminitis. So just things that you need to be aware of are things like your horse and pony shifting their weight when they're resting, if they're reluctant to turn, if they're reluctant to have a foot picked up, if you think that they're shortening their stride, and very often as well, if they're reluctant to move forward from when they go from a soft surface, so say coming off grass onto a harder surface like a concrete yard. Again, I'll often have an owner say to me, oh, you know, they're absolutely fine, they're just a bit footy. And a lot of the time it will turn out to be laminitis. Because laminitis, as I said, laminitis can affect all the feet, but because it usually affects the front feet, and sometimes all four, you won't actually see your pony limping. So it's very often not even an obvious lameness. So a bit like us, if we hurt our foot, we limp, but if we hurt both feet, we can't limp on both feet. So we adjust our gait. So that's what you're seeing. You know, if you see that shortening of stride, or you think your horse or pony looks a little bit footy, then that just might be one of those warning signals to look out for. Next slide, please, Lizzie. So another early sign is the farrier, if they pick up on bruising of the sole, particularly when it can be seen on the outside of the hoof capsule. So if you look at the top photo on the right, you can see it's sort of like that little pink area there where the bruise can be seen on the outside of the hoof. So that can be significant. So really pay attention if your farrier spots anything like that. And then the bottom picture shows somebody checking their pony's digital pulse. It's quite easy to do, but if you're not used to doing it or you haven't done it before, then do practice and get into the habit of doing it regularly, along with checking the hoof for heat. if you haven't done it before, then ask your vet to show you, or someone you know who knows how to do it. And there are lots of tutorial videos online as well that will show you how to take the digital pulse. When you are checking it, you're checking for what could be described as like a bounding pulse. It will feel really strong. Obviously, the digital pulse is always there, but when the hoof is healthy, that pulse won't feel particularly prominent or noticeable. But when there is an issue in the foot, that digital pulse will feel really strong. It doesn't mean your pony has got laminitis, but usually it does indicate there's an issue in the foot. So again, it's still definitely worth paying attention to if you notice that. Next slide, please. So what to do? Call the vet absolutely straight away. It is an emergency. And again, this is something that I come across as a field officer. Laminitic pony out in the field, managed to track the owner down, and they can often be very, very reluctant to call a vet because it's just not something that they see as an emergency. So that should be absolutely the first thing that you do. Move your horse or pony as little as possible. So that might mean staying with them while you wait for the vet, particularly if you're out in the field. Yes, of course, you don't want them to continue grazing and eating grass, but once the vet has arrived, they'll be able to give them pain relief, and then you may be able to walk them back to their shelter or their stable. You might even need to consider using a trailer. So, for example, if your yard is a walk down the road from your field, then that might be something that you have to think about doing if you're able to. So when they have laminitis, their hoof structure is unstable. So again, think of it as being like a fracture. So it's the instability that causes the pain. So what you can do is provide support to their feet. You can buy hoof supports, but if you haven't got any on you, then you can use big thick pads of cotton wool and gaffer tape until you're able to get some. Try not to let your horse or pony stand on concrete. Make sure they have a really good thick deep bed to help support their feet, and make sure that bed goes all the way up to the stable door. Don't worry about having a neat tidy bit in front. You just want plenty of bedding in there, and that will really help keep them comfortable. Next slide, please. So both underweight and overweight horses and ponies will come with their own set of health problems. When a horse or pony is overweight, as well as the increased risk of laminitis, they have a higher likelihood of developing metabolic disorders like EMS, and an increased risk of joint stress and arthritis. I thought it would be useful to show you these photos. If you have watched some of our World Horse Welfare webinars before, you probably recognise these photos. So this is Dollar, who is a 14-hand gelding who came into our care some time ago. In the photo on the left, you can see he's overweight, and in the photo on the right, he's at his healthy weight. Most people think in this photo that he just looks a little bit overweight. We actually did a poll on this where we asked people to guess how many stones overweight he was, and most people thought he was probably between 6 and 8 stone overweight. He was in fact over 28 stone in weight, so that's around about 180 kilos, or to put it another way, he was basically carrying the extra weight of 2 grown men 24 hours a day. I just thought it would be useful to show you this, as it surprises most people that he was as much as 28 stone overweight, because actually he doesn't look it in that photo on the left. Next slide, please. So if we compare this to another 14-hand gelding that came into our care, so this is Bahia, he was the same amount underweight. So he was, when he came into our care, 28 stone underweight, or 180 kilos. No one, I don't think, would question that he is an unhealthy weight in the photo on the left. But what is worth knowing is that he achieved his healthy weight in a third of the time that it took Dollar, the previous horse, to achieve his healthy weight. And Bahia had no long-term health issues as a result of being underweight, but Dollar unfortunately had ongoing lameness issues as a result of his condition. Next slide, please. Generic weight management can be really frustrating because there is no one size fits all solution. If you have an overweight horse or pony, it can be really challenging and quite stressful too. A lot of the horses that come into our centres are underweight, but we are seeing an increase in horses and ponies coming in overweight condition. And often the ones who are underweight are good doers and natives who are predisposed to storing weight. So once we've got them to a healthy weight, it can be a real challenge to keep them there. Try and be objective when you're assessing your own horse and pony. I know that is easier said than done. When I talk to owners in my job role, I find that they face lots of challenges with weight loss. Often they feel guilty for restricting their horse's diet, or they can't ride their horse, or they're in a situation where they can't restrict the grazing because that particular livery yard that they're on doesn't allow it. So I do find that owners of overweight horses and ponies, or those that have to try really hard to manage their weight, do get really disheartened. My advice would be, if your horse or pony is overweight, please don't give up. Try and figure out not just what works for your horse, but try and figure out what works for you as well, and stick with it. Next slide, please. So it's important to remember that energy equals calories. I know these common causes of obesity will probably seem obvious, but I do come across owners who are feeding competition mix to their overweight horse because they think their overweight horse is lazy. So they give them competition mixes and oats and all that sort of thing. But actually what's happening is that they're feeding more calories. So instead of the horse or pony having more energy, they're just gaining more weight instead. A lot of owners as well often don't weigh their feed and hay rations. So they're inadvertently feeding more calories than they actually need to. I also think from experience that there are misconceptions when it comes to what is an ideal body condition. And I do think actually that overweight horses and ponies are becoming normalised. To give you an example of that, only a couple of weeks ago, I went out to a welfare concern on a DIY livery yard. The concern was for 2 horses that were in underweight condition. Actually, when I got there, as luck would have it, the owner was there and was very happy to take their rugs off and show them to me. But they were 2 thoroughbreds who regularly compete, and actually they were in perfect body condition, and the majority of the other horses and ponies of the yard were native types or cobs. Some of those were absolutely fine, but I did notice that quite a few of them were overweight. So I do think that there is this feeling that when you see 2 horses, particularly thoroughbreds, that are at a correct weight, that when they are next to horses or ponies that are overweight, that there is this sort of sense that the 2 that are the normal weight are actually underweight. So yeah, there is a bit of a lack of misunderstanding, I think. Next slide, please. So the first thing to understand is the assessment criteria that you can compare your horse to. Knowing your horse's actual weight is useful for a number of reasons, such as getting your worming dosage right, and it does help you to monitor any changes. But what it won't tell you is if that is the right weight for that particular horse. So use fat scoring combined with knowing your horse's weight as the most effective way of knowing if your horse is a healthy weight and then maintaining it. You'll probably have heard of this as body condition scoring, but at World Horse Welfare, we refer to it as fat scoring, because what you're actually doing is assessing the amount of fat that is covering the skeleton. We're not looking at muscle tone or coat condition. Also, keep records either once a week or every fortnight, and this will really help you see small changes and pick up on what is or what isn't working. Slide, please. There are two main body scoring systems. One is the 0 to 5 system, or you can use the 1 to 9 system. Both are extremely good and both provide an effective way of assessing condition and use hands-on techniques, so to feel for fat cover rather than just looking at the horse. My advice would be to use whichever system you feel the most comfortable with. Both systems use a low score as underweight and a high score as overweight. So whichever system you use, you're aiming for somewhere in the middle. I'm going to use the 0 to 5 scale here because if you're not used to fat scoring, the 0 to 5 system can be a little bit easier to apply. So using the 0 to 5 scale, a healthy weight horse will be in the middle, so ideally between a 2 and a 3. And the picture on the right, this is just to show you how to basically split your horse into to 3. So you will fat score the 3 different areas separately, and you'll give each section a score. So 1 for the neck and shoulders, 1 for the middle, and then a score of 1 to 5 for the hindquarters as well, and then take your average. And that will give you the more accurate score of your horse's overall condition. And it also helps you to identify any danger areas. Just like humans, horses can carry weight in certain areas. So particularly something we need to be aware of with horses or ponies that are at risk of laminitis is excess weight that they're carrying on their neck. So this will help with that. The dotted line on the picture there is just to show you that where they tend to store fat is above that line. So other than in extreme cases, assess your horse above where that dotted line is. So learn how to fat score. It's so important to get your hands on. You can also take a look at the World Horse Welfare YouTube channel. You'll find some really helpful videos on there that will show you how to fat score. Slide, please. I just thought it would be useful to go through this. There are some areas where it can get a little bit confusing. The belly area is one because it's where humans tend to store fat. So it's really easy for us to be drawn to the belly area. Some horses can be a little bit saggy in that area. So brood mares, for example. So try not to focus on that. In the neck, we have the neutral ligament. There's no muscle above that ligament. So any tissue above that ligament is definitely fat. It's not muscle. I'll often have owners say to me that their cob shouldn't look like thoroughbred, and that's why they don't want their horse to lose weight. And of course, a cob absolutely shouldn't look like thoroughbred. But the beauty of fat scoring is that you can use the same fat scoring system for different breeds. So in these photos, we've obviously got 2 completely different breeds with a completely different body shape, but both of these would be a similar fat score. A horse in work is going to be a different shape and tone to a horse that's not in work. So this is where fat scoring is so useful, because remember, like I said, you're feeling for fat, not muscle tone. So in other words, you can have 2 horses, one very fit and in work and the other in no work. They'll look very different, even if they're the same breed, but they'll still have the same fat score. Slide, please. So following on from that, I thought it would be useful to show you a few comparison photos just to help you get the idea if you've never fat scored before. And this will also help you if you do want to go in and watch any of the tutorial videos on fat scoring. So the black pony on the left is a healthy weight and the bay pony on the right is overweight. I mentioned the neutral ligament earlier. So the hands in the photo are showing you where to feel for that ligament, And if you look at the bay pony on the right, you can see there where the excess fat is above that ligament. Slide, please. So look at the hands here on both photos. You'll see hands on the black pony are flat. So that's showing that that part of the horse's body is firm, whereas the fingers on the bay pony are pressing into the fat there just behind the shoulder. Slide, please. Moving on to the ribs. You should be able to feel them. So you can see in the photos that the person with the bay horse is really having to push quite firmly to be able to feel those ribs. And you know, sometimes with some horses or ponies, you can push really quite hard and you can't feel them at all. But what it should be like is the photo of the black horse, where you can just keep your hands flat and run your hand over the rib cage, and you should just about be able to feel those ribs. It's worth me pointing out as well that it's usually easier to feel the last sort of 3 and 4th ribs, and usually it's fine if you can just see the outline of those last ribs as well. That's not normally something to worry about. Slide, please. When you're fat scoring the back, aim to have your hands relaxed over the area where the saddle would be. And what should happen is your hands should naturally form an arch. So you can see that on the black pony. If your horse is carrying excess weight on his back, then what you'll find is that your hands will be flat. And on this photo, you can also see a gutter along this horse's back where fat is building up either side of the spine. Slide, please. And finally, onto the hindquarters. You can see on the bay horse, when you compare him to the black horse, where there is a buildup of fat. So you can see that gutter again that we saw on the back in the previous slide. And there's also a buildup of fat across the top of his tail as well that you can probably just see there on the photo. Slide, please. So if you think your horse is overweight, what do you do now? These are just some suggestions of things that you can consider, and I will go into a little bit more detail on these later on. But, you know, as I mentioned earlier, energy equals calories. So, you know, that's something that you do need to think about, how many calories your horse actually needs. Think about if you need to restrict your grazing. Horses and ponies often eat far more in calories than they actually require, and consider how to slow down the rate at which your horse is eating, because this will also help prevent boredom and also provide enrichment. And we'll also have a little talk about where you need to rug and what sort of things you can do if your horse can be exercised or not. Slide, please. So the majority of horses and ponies will get more calories than they need just from grass alone. So in many cases, you may need to consider restricting grazing in some way. To give you an idea, horses and ponies need 2.5% of their body weight in food a day. So by that, I mean what their healthy body weight. And they'll need less than that if they're going on a weight loss program. But research has found that ponies with access to good grazing on a 24-hour period could consume up to 3.8% of their body weight per day. So the problem then is that your horse or pony is getting far more calories than they actually need. You'll also need to consider things like the breed of your horse or pony. So different breeds are going to have different grazing needs, the size of your horse, the type of grazing you have, and also the condition of your grazing at the time. For example, you can see in the strict grazing picture on the right-hand side that the grass has been grazed very short. This is a photo from our rescue and rehabilitation centre in Somerset, where the soil is clay, but what you wouldn't want to do is graze grass this short on sandy soil because of the risk of sand colic. So as an alternative, what you could do is, if you've got small ponies, you could use small paddocks, although again, be mindful with small paddocks that this can then restrict their movement, and if there's less movement, they're burning less calories. And strip grazing can, as an alternative, can be a good way of introducing new pasture without overloading your horse with new grass, which again in turn minimises the risk of laminitis and colic and weight gain. So again, just a couple of ideas there of things that you might be in a position to try. Slide, please. Another system you could consider is a track system. These have really been growing in popularity in the UK. They work by providing exercise because they encourage more movement. If you have a track system that isn't on grass, then you can put feeding stations in there. You can use an alternative surface, so they can be excellent in winter, particularly when it's muddy. One of the disadvantages, I suppose, if you can call it that, is that they do need to be managed, and you need to make sure that there is enough space for the number of horses. But what is really excellent about them is they do mimic a more natural lifestyle, and research has shown that horses kept on track systems do cover much greater distances. So again, you're getting more of a calorie burn. I do fully appreciate that it might not be easy to replicate a track system if you don't have access to acres and acres of land, but you can experiment a little bit with this as well. So, you know, if you only have a small paddock, you could use a little bit of electric fencing inside of your paddock. I've seen people put their electric fencing in like a U shape, and then they place their hay and water at different ends to encourage their horse to move around to get from one at the other. If again, going back to our YouTube channel, we did do a webinar, I think it was a couple of years ago now, about different types of grazing systems. So, you know, if that's something that you want to consider doing, then that would be definitely worth a watch. Next slide, please. Even if your horse is on a weight loss management plan, they are likely going to need supplementary feeding during some parts of the year, particularly if you're restricting grazing, because you do need to maintain the bulk. Horses have a natural instinct to chew, and this needs to be met to prevent unwanted vices such as crib biting. Horses in the wild spend around 75% of their time eating, so things to consider here could be feeding your hay in small hold hay nets, or using a hay ball, just to slow down that rate of consumption, which, you know, will help prevent boredom as well. Work out your horse's total daily feed ration and weigh your feed and hay. So if you're you want to work on around 2 to 2.5% of their ideal body weight, as we said earlier. But if your horse is very overweight, you can reduce this to 1.5%, but absolutely do this with your vet's advice first, and absolutely don't be tempted to crash diet either. You can also soak your hay for at least 12 hours. This reduces the sugars and therefore the calories. Also have a think about what type of hay you have, as it can vary greatly in nutritional value. You can get your hay tested. I believe the majority of feed companies will offer this service. So again, something to consider, find out just how nutritional your hay actually is. If you do happen to be feeding a hay that is low in nutritional value, and you're soaking it for 12 hours or more, then you may even be able to feed it ad lib. You can also consider feeding straw as well, and not wheat straw because it's not digestible. I did read a study that said, as you know, like any feed change, as long as you introduce the straw gradually, it can make up 50% of your horse's diet. But I do believe that there is some research out there that says that actually it's safe to feed all of the diet a straw. Certainly I know that the Donkey Sanctuary in Devon do feed the majority of their donkeys straw. So again, just something that you can consider and have a think about. You potentially you may need to feed a supplement to provide essential vitamins and minerals, and again, you can get low calorie versions of those. You know, particularly if you're feeding a low nutritional hay or straw, and you're soaking your hay as well, then you will need to have a look at doing that. If you're feeding a balancer or a supplement that's in pellet form, you could consider using a treat ball. So again, it's just another way of using something to make it take longer to consume. When I suggest grazing muzzles to people, often they look at me in absolute horror. There are a huge range of them on the market, and it is important that they fit correctly. They shouldn't be used for longer than 12 hours, and you do need to consider the grass length as well, because if the grass is too short, they won't be able to grab it, and that's going to make them very frustrated and also hungry. And if the grass is too long, then it's going to bend over, and again they won't be able to grab it through the muzzle. You will need to think about what you do when you take the muzzle off. Ponies in particular are so clever. Chances are, as soon as the muzzle comes off, they're going to gorge on the grass. So this might be when you need to think about bringing your pony in off the grass, maybe onto a yard area, and then feed your soaked hay or your straw so that they're satisfying their appetite, but with far less calories. And then when you put them back out in their paddock or their track system or whatever you're using, then they're not being turned back out onto grass hungry. So hopefully that will help you. Same principle if you're using a system where you turn your ponies out for part of the day and then bring them onto the yard. When you go to turn them back out again, try not to turn them back out on grass when they're hungry. Next slide, please. There might be factors that dictate if you can use exercise as a form of weight management, and also what forms of exercise you're able to do. There might be medical issues that affect your horse. It might depend on what you feel confident doing as a handler or rider, and also what access to facilities and bridleways that you've got. You might not have roads that you feel are suitable to go out on, for example. If your horse can't be ridden, but you're considering using other methods of exercise such as long reining or lunging, then I would advise speaking to your vet and your physio first, just to make sure it's safe and appropriate for your horse and pony, and also consider their current fitness level as well, because what you don't want to do is be putting extra strain on them and causing an injury. If your horse is very overweight or unfit, then like I said, consider your fitness plan. Remember to make any changes gradually. What you could do, even if your horse can only walk in hand, if you've got access to some hills and you've got the time to do so, walking up a hill is obviously going to burn more calories than walking on the flat. So although generally trotting and cantering are going to burn more calories, that there are other things that you can do. So get up some hills and really try and go for a really energetic walk as well, if you're able to. Next slide, please. Horses naturally thermoregulate. So what this basically means is that they can self-adjust their internal body temperature like a thermostat. So even when the temperature outside is very different, the thermoneutral range of a human is around 25 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius, and that would be at rest wearing light clothing. In comparison to that, the average thermoneutral range of a horse is much wider, so that actually varies from 5 degrees Celsius to 25 degrees Celsius at rest. So unlike us, on a calm, dry day, a horse or pony won't feel the cold until the surrounding temperature drops below 5 degrees Celsius. If your horse has a really thick coat, it might even be lower temperatures than that, but obviously it can vary depending on their breed, their age, and if they're clipped. And also bear in mind that on a wet and windy day, your horse may feel colder, even if the surrounding temperature is in their thermoneutral range. And also as well, horses that are elderly or underweight or ill will be less able to cope. I went on a welfare concern around about a month ago, and when I got out of my car, the thermometer on my car said the outside temperature was 15 degrees Celsius. So, obviously not tropical, but certainly not cold either. And I walked down a public footpath, and in a field on the right-hand side, there were several ponies, mostly native types, all wearing turnout rugs with neck covers, and literally opposite, in another field, there were 2 thoroughbreds, not rugged, and I don't know what the body condition was of the ponies in the right-hand field wearing rugs. I'm certainly not suggesting that they were overweight, but I did think it would be worth me mentioning here that the 2 thoroughbreds out in the field without any rugs on were a perfect body weight. So again, just really consider if rugging is something that you need to do. If your horse starts to have a drop in temperature, his body naturally speeds up some internal chemical reactions to create more body heat, and that uses calories. So that's why it's really important to consider if you do need to use a rug or not. Horses can also increase their body heat by moving around and shivering, so that also creates the same effect. So exercise and movement and shivering create heat, which uses calories. Shivering is a natural way to warm up. If it's excessive, and if they're standing hunched up in a corner and they're reluctant to move, then that's a signal that you likely do need to start using a rug. But if it's just, just a little bit of shivering and there's no other signs that they're uncomfortable, then chances are you don't need to use a rug. Another thing to bear in mind in the winter is that the fibrous forage that you're feeding will generate heat through the fermentation process. So it's a little bit like it's an internal central heating system. It's like them having a little radiator inside them. So again, consider if you need to use a rug, and also don't rug because you're feeling cold, which I don't mean to sound critical of anybody. I am exactly the same, and I am the first person that thinks, oh, I wonder if the horse needs a rug on because I'm feeling a bit cold. So try not to fall into that trap if you possibly can. When you do rug accordingly and adapt that as and when the weather changes as well. If it's a case of using a rug is convenient for you, so you lead a busy life, you need a clean dry horse when you get to the yard after work, so just having that rug on just makes your life so much easier because you don't need to spend hours grooming all the mud off before you can ride, then just use a rain sheet with no filling. And also consider clipping as well. It really is a great weight loss tool. Lots of ponies with a neck and belly clip, or even a trace clip or a blanket clip, turned out with no rug, will cope really well. If you have an overweight pony who's having to burn a few extra calories to keep warm, that's a good thing. I do remember some years ago now, as a newly qualified BHS AI, going to work on a yard, and the riding school ponies on that yard, who were all native types, lived out all winter with neck and belly clips and no rugs. And I remember my first day in that job being utterly horrified at that. I just thought that was so awful that these ponies were out in the snow with no rugs on at all. But I have to say, I did come to realise quite quickly that they were a really happy bunch of ponies. And they, the years that I worked there, those ponies always stayed a really good weight. Obviously they were riding school ponies, so they had the benefit of being exercised, but my employer's opinion was that by clipping them and turning them out without rugs, she could feed them ad pay, so they were never bored and they were never stale, because they were out in the field when they weren't being worked, and they always had plenty to eat, so they were never hungry. So again, just something to have a think about. And what you ideally need to do is aim to come out of the winter with your horse or pony at a fat score of about 2.5. So winter is nature's way of making sure that horses and ponies don't come into the spring in overweight condition. So if they come out of the winter a little bit underweight, that really is absolutely nothing to worry about. Next slide, please. So just to recap, here are a few things to try and keep in mind. Weight loss and weight management are long term, and as I said earlier, it's really easy to get disheartened. So don't be tempted to crash diet, and do be prepared to be in it for the long haul. If something doesn't work, think about what needs to change, but also make those changes gradually. If you can, consider a buddy system. So if you know of someone who is in a similar situation to yourself, then you can help and support each other as well. You know, that sort of help can be really invaluable. Next slide, please. Which leads me nicely on to what help and support there is out there. Both laminitis and weight management, like I said earlier, they're huge topics, and I certainly won't have covered everything this evening. World Horse Welfare have produced 2 leaflets which give an excellent overview of both topics, providing really practical advice, and you can find both of these leaflets available to download on our website. Also tune into our Welfare Wednesday webinars that run throughout the winter months, and if you're not able to watch them live, you can find them on our YouTube channel. I'd really recommend watching them. There are 2 webinars on there at the moment on weight management and nutrition, and another one on laminitis, plus a whole other range of topics, so they are a really good source of information. We also have a advice line that you can call during office hours. So that's the number there on the slide, but you'll also find that on our website. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I haven't bored anybody to death. And do you have any questions?
Hi, Sarah.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. That was so interesting. We'll wait for some questions to come through. If we're still, hopefully, I think we've still got a few people there. We've had quite a good number of people live. But I actually have a couple of questions because I just found that super interesting. One of the first things that came to me, and just to pick on, you mentioned the digital pulse videos. Is there any way you can recommend, or what's a good website, or do the World Horse Welfare have some links on there to take the digital pulse?
Yes, if you go on if you go onto YouTube and just pop in World Horse Welfare, you'll find the World Horse Welfare YouTube channel, and we have got quite a good video on there. So Caroline, who is our assistant centre manager, yard manager at Belwade Farm in Scotland, we've got a video with her showing you how to find the digital pulse. So I'm not sure exactly how you navigate to it out of the in the actual channel. I normally just search it. So I think if you put something into YouTube like World Horse Welfare digital pulse video, you would probably find it quite easily.
Amazing, thank you. I've just got a question come in, so I'll skip to how. I'll read the question first in my head before.
Okay.
Okay, that's a really good one. How do you adapt to the information you've given to a young 2-year-old Highland pony that is still growing but has developed laminitis?
Oh, well, I'm really sorry to hear he's developed laminitis, but I'm assuming that you're asking about his age, because obviously he's young, he's going to be inquisitive, he's going to have more energy than, say, an older horse or pony, so it's going to be more challenging, I suppose, to keep him entertained and stop him from getting bored. I know at our farm in Somerset, when horses and ponies are on restricted grazing, or they're having to spend long periods of time on box rest, one of the forms of enrichment that they use is that they will pick, obviously, horse-friendly trees. So they'll go and pick branches from trees and shrubs that aren't, that horses and ponies can eat, and they'll we're fortunate there in that we've got grills between the stables, so they'll sort of weave those branches through the grill, so it gives them something to pick at. Obviously, again, I'm mindful that that's calories, so you would need to be a little bit careful with that. But things like treat balls, anything that you can think of to slow down his consumption. There's loads and loads of videos online. All of the sort of the big equine charities have got lots of different ideas on their website, so I would have a look at those as well. Hopefully that's answered your question, but yeah, do come back to us if I've not gone into enough detail there, then please do come back to me.
Brilliant. We'll just see if that lady does come back with some more questions, but I've got another one which might lead in actually a bit to what she said. Do you think if your horse has been obese and laminitis and those problems are now in control, the horse's weight is in control and the laminitis is now in control, do you think that horse is for the rest of its life going to be predisposed to have laminitis bouts or become obese again very easily?
Unfortunately, it's likely. Certainly with the laminitis, then that does put that horse or pony at more risk. So firstly, very well done for getting an overweight horse down to a healthy weight. Like I said, it's very challenging, so you've already managed the first hurdle, but yes, unfortunately there's still an awful lot that we have to learn about laminitis. There are still things that we don't know, and although we know obviously there's a link to laminitis and obesity, I'm sure in the coming years there'll be more research that starts to clarify things a lot more. But yes, unfortunately, that once they are have become overweight and once they have had laminitis, then they are at more risk. It doesn't mean that horse will ever be overweight again, and it doesn't mean that horse will definitely get laminitis again, but obviously in your day-to-day management throughout the year, that's something that you're always going to have to bear in mind and then manage that horse or pony accordingly.
Thank you. I think this is a tricky question, but I thought I'll throw it in there. Do you think people spend, like horse owners spend a lot of their time putting their own feelings across to the animal, and that could be centered to some of the problem? Or is it that we've got these little native ponies who are just now genetically predisposed to this problem?
I think it's both, to be honest. Obviously, our native breeds, they evolved to live in quite harsh conditions. They would have to walk miles and miles to find food, and now we've domesticated them. Our grazing is changing gradually. Even a field that's been grazed right down. Lots of private fields have their grass quality is really good. It's just not what they evolved to eat. So there is definitely that is a factor. So going back to the track systems a little bit, that's why they can be really useful, because it sort of mimics that natural lifestyle a little bit. It gets the horse and pony moving around looking for the food rather than just standing there and continuously munching away. But that said, in my experience as a field officer, and I think we're all a little bit guilty of this, to be honest, it is very easy to project your own emotions onto your horse or pony, and particularly when the weather is cold, and particularly when it's wet and miserable. Again, we'll often get people who ring into our welfare line who want to report a horse or pony because they're stood out in a field in the rain without a coat on. So generally those are people who aren't horsey and don't necessarily understand that horses and ponies don't always need a rug. But yeah, I think regardless of whether you're a horsey person or not, it's so easy to I do it. I will walk past a field and the weather can be absolutely awful. It can be lashing down and cold, and there'll be a little cob stood there with their head down, looking a little bit like Eeyore, sort of all sad and dejected, and 9 times out of 10 they're absolutely fine. They're just having a rest, and actually they haven't even noticed the weather, and often that's something I see as well. The weather can be really truly awful, and there'll be a little group of horses out in the field with access to a lovely field shelter or a lovely big hedge, and they're not using it. They're out in the middle of the field in the gale force winds and the rain, just grazing or playing or whatever. So yeah, definitely a combination of both.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I haven't got any more questions actually that have come in, so I think we've got a quiet crowd tonight. I think one question I'd like to ask just you personally, what do you think is the worst welfare case you have seen, and would it be obesity or laminitis related?
I think it depends how you define worst, really. I think you can sort of say that the worst welfare concern is the ones where you go out to and, you know, the horses are, say, emaciated and they're living in squalor, and they've got, you know, medical conditions that haven't been treated or addressed. And I think actually that when people think of a welfare concern, that is what they think of. But actually, in another sense, the worst welfare concerns are when you come across a horse or pony who is very overweight, and the owner isn't recognising that and actually doesn't want to do anything about it. So that, in a way, those are the worst, because they can be the most frustrating to deal with. So as I mentioned earlier, with the Dollar and Bahia, the horses in the photos where they were both, one was 28 stone overweight and one was 28 stone underweight. A horse or pony that is 28 stone underweight, it would be it's really easy to demonstrate that horse or pony is suffering, because if they are in that poor body condition because they haven't had an appropriate diet, they've basically been starved, and that's quite straightforward and clear cut. But when you've got a horse or pony that's very overweight, that horse or pony hasn't been starved. You know, very often it's the exact opposite. It's almost killing them with kindness, because they've got an owner that just keeps feeding them because they love them. So yeah, it's difficult to define, really. You can see as a field officer really awful things and awful situations, but actually it can be the cases where, you know, you have got an overweight horse or pony, or a horse or pony with laminitis, where the owner doesn't want to address that or deal with it. Or what is particularly bad, when you've had a horse or pony that's had laminitis and the vet has been out and treated the pony and given the owner advice on how to manage that pony going forwards, and then that advice isn't listened to, and then the pony ends up back in the same situation, which is awful.
It is sad, and we see it with small animals, don't we? We see it with dogs and cats, and not just horses. So it's across the board as a concern in the veterinary industry. So great answer, and thank you, Sarah, so much for tonight. I've certainly found it really useful, and I hope people will find lots of take-home tips there to use. We will share some of the contact points. I'll share some of those the last detailed points that you put on, Sarah, because they're really useful for people to use. And also, if anybody wants copies of the booklets that Sarah showed up, so the laminitis one or the obesity one, then please drop me an email. I've actually got copies. This is the Bova warehouse right behind me, so I've actually got copies sat here, and my email is just office@bova.co.uk. And I'm more than happy to send some copies out to you. If you're a vet listening, I can send a little handful out for you for your owners. If you're an owner listening, more than happy to pop them in the post for you as well. So please just send me an email, or if you're happy with a downloadable copy, then they're just as good as well. So Sarah, thank you so much for tonight. We're going to stop the broadcast now. If you do think of any more questions later on, then please drop me an email, office@bova.co.uk, and I can share that with Sarah as well. So thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you.